Morning, morning, morning. This is like a family reunion. Lovely to see lots of faces we know, lots of landscapers here, lots of conservancies here, lots of municipalities. We welcome you all. We welcome the South African Police. We welcome the K9 unit. We welcome all sorts of interesting people interested in biosecurity compliance. We have lieutenant colonels here today. We have captains here today, and we have some seriously high-level deputy director generals from biosecurity compliance and enforcement. So today is the day that you really want to ask questions. If you want your questions answered, in this room there really are a family of people who will really be able to answer all your queries. From my perspective, my job is just to sort of say, where did we come from and where are we going? This is our history. Our history was, and certainly people like Mornay, myself, Karina, Warren, we say a big shout out to Lucas Otto here today, who's in the audience, but who's also been part of the whole operation for the last 20 years. We came from these partnerships, and basically the invasive species legislation, when South Africa decided to do invasive species legislation, which was a good 25 years ago, they said we cannot do it unless we have public participation and people coming forward and being part of the whole operation. And they set about putting partnerships together. And the partnerships were the horticultural partnership, the forestry partnership, the pet trade partnership. And people like Mornay and myself and Warren come from the Mornay and myself come from the horticultural side of the operation. Warren certainly has had a lot to do with the pet trade, and he's an expert there. I think we need to be very grateful along the way that in South Africa, the poverty relief programs were devoted to environment. In the United States, the Roosevelt New Deal in the 30s, when they had a big repression, was to put everybody to work on roads, railways and bridges. In South Africa, the poverty relief program was to put people to work in the environment. And to this day, this is the last of the RDP programs that still exists from 1994-5. And we certainly recognize a lot of these, we're going to be talking about them today. Eco-furniture factories, wetlands, water, fire, and these programs still exist. They still employ an awful lot of people. We came into the system when certainly Dr. Guy Preston, who's a bit of a legend in this particular area and is now retired, basically phoned us up and said, the scientists say we must cut down all the jacarandas, and gee whiz, can you believe it? The people in Pretoria are a bit angry about that. So can you come along and suggest to us how we do stakeholder engagement? So here we are, 22 years later, doing stakeholder engagement again to work out how it all works and what it does. Fast forward, you'll be pleased to know I'm not going to give you 22 years of history. Fast forward to 2022, and we're now sitting in a situation where we still have barriers and frontiers of conflict. The horticultural industry is still negotiating with the government over all sorts of hybrid cultivars, but the government is still putting a lot of money into people working out on the grounds, and today we will hear the permitting from the real permitting guys. Not just, me telling you what the story is. They are here today and they're going to tell you what's going on. But I can tell you that we still have conflict, and we have conflict over the dragon fruit. So we have the white dragon fruit, and the white dragon fruit is a category 2. All fruit are exempt, so we've got all these growers that can grow it, no problem. But the minute a category 2 gets into the nurseries, there's a problem. And we know that for a lot of species like house crows, dragon fruit, we don't really want the karoo covered in dragon fruit invasive species. So at the moment we've got the one dragon fruit that is actually on the list, and then of course we've got the red dragon fruit that is actually not on the list as a completely different species. So the conflict is very much, should you allow the media to promote the dragon fruit that's going to be eventually put onto the list because it is invasive, or do you not? And we have friends in the industry. Tanya Visser, for example, is a great friend of invasive species sector, and she phoned me up in about November and she said, hey, listen, Kay, you were, harping on about some dragon fruit nonsense. My staff have put together a 2-page story plus a front cover with the dragon fruit. Is that okay? Can we send it out on the December issue? I sent it out to all the scientists, and the scientists had a complete cadenza. They said absolutely no, we should not be allowing the media to promote species that we think are not good for the country and should not actually be promoted. So thank you very much to Tanya Visser. She withdrew that particular article, but then we don't catch all of them. Go Platteland put the actual dragon fruit into their particular article, and so it goes on. You are the Springbok team of invasive species interested people, and we rely on you to know where the lines of conflict are, where the debates are. This is not a black and white issue. We have something called the Empress Tree, which is a category 1A, but unfortunately in 2005, before any of the legislation, the phytosanitary guys at agriculture allowed a whole bunch of these trees in, and a whole bunch of businessmen put a lot of money into growing Empress Tree forests in KwaZulu-Natal. Now we have those forests there, and there's a huge debate inside government as to whether those Empress trees should be allowed to grow, because now we have a whole sustainability debate about we should be growing our timber, growing our wood, plastic's bad, concrete's bad for climate change, we must be a sustainable society on wood on the one hand, and then we have basically these companies out there promoting, investing, saying in actual fact that, you know, please, how are we going to, you know, invest in this kind of plantations? We know if this tree gets out of those plantations, we're all in trouble. At the moment, theoretically, as 1A species, these trees should not be allowed in the country. They should be removed, they should be taken out. But they are still there, and people are debating and dithering that if one hand of government allowed them in, should the other hand of government actually let them exist? Nobody has the answer, it has a debate. Now, if we're going to air all these features and all these ideas, we have to understand that there's been massive changes in the media over the last 3 decades. The media is not what it was 20 years ago, and I say that coming from the media myself. I was in the print media, and we did an experiment about 3 or 4 months ago. This is Patterson's curse. It's a huge big problem in Cape Town. A PhD student from Kaput, she's actually a lecturer there, was doing a big study in it. We sent a press release to all the newspapers in Cape Town and all the radio stations. Not one single one of them picked up the story and ran with it. The traditional media does not have time for invasive species. They have time for what Cyril's doing. They have time for Ukraine. They have time for the latest disaster on which badly behaved rugby players are doing what, where, how, and why. They don't have time for where the Patterson's curse is. And we as conservationists, we as conservancies, we as garden centre retailers, we have to actually do our own promotions. And so we've started a system whereby we are putting a lot of this material together, and hopefully in the next month you will be able to download a whole bunch of things about invasive species. Now, what we are looking at this particular year is we're looking at a lot of animals. We spent 20 years on the plants. There are now plant experts around here, and we have the Spottiswoods here. We have a whole bunch of really expertise people who are experts in plants. But the experts in animals are far fewer on the ground. So the rose-ring parakeet is a very big issue, and again it's a conflict issue. There are a lot of people who put rose-ring parakeets keep them as caged birds. They trade in rose-ring parakeets. And our job is to actually take the old material, put it into, sort of develop a toolbox of material, and we actually at the moment are developing campaigns for this particular rose-ring parakeet. There's a huge big problem with feral rose-ring parakeets dating back to the 1970s, and any of you live in the Centurion area, Umhlanga Rocks area, around the Monte Cassino area, will have seen vast flocks. And a very good friend of mine in KwaZulu-Natal, Ian Rushworth from KwaZulu-Natal, KZN Ezemvelo Wildlife, said to me, do we want these birds to be covered, the whole of the Kruger National Park to be covered, the whole of the Pilanesberg to be covered, such that when you go to these national parks, all you see is flocks and flocks of these birds, and they just take over where the naturalized indigenous birds are. So we've got to actually have a look at this, and certainly we've got to start promoting what life will be if we allow these birds, and certainly we'll talk about the house crows a bit later as well. So we've developed these templates, and in the next month these templates will be available for downloading by any garden centre, landscaping operation, horticulturist. who would like to actually conservancy, who would like to promote all this material, and we will be giving you these templates that you can actually put directly onto your own Facebook pages with information. Facebook is easy to operate, but one of the biggest problems is getting the material, getting the 4 pictures, getting the template, and we will supply you with all that material. And you can see, we put this particular rose-ring parakeet up in January. It is a new issue for a lot of people. 66,000 people are reached, and certainly as a past editor of niche magazines, I can tell you reaching 66,000 people is actually something that most garden magazines in the country have never ever done in the last 25 years. So this is the way to go, and digital, I'm a great firm believer in the whole digital operation. We are going to do the same with invasive mallards. There's all the old material that already has been created. We have found that the Save Our Indigenous Waterfowl, that particular campaign which has been running in Cape Town, the forefront of all the conflict on mallards is Cape Town, because that's where all the activists are. And obviously when we, the municipalities are, it's their job to go out and it's their job to remove mallards by law. And certainly this here, Cape Town has been doing this, and of course they arrive at dams and then there are huge big demonstrations. So we are all trying to work out how we communicate that mallards are a problem to society, and we do have huge problems. Donald Duck has made a huge impact on society. He has yellow feet, so do mallards have yellow feet. We come from a world where we're taught that on Sunday afternoon you take your grandchildren and you take some bread and you go and feed the ducks at the dam. Well, bread is not very good for ducks anyway, and you know, we have to educate people as to there's ducks and there's ducks. And somewhere along the line, we're not succeeding by a long shot, but guess what? It's not going to stop us from trying. Then for those of you who have spent the last 10, 15 years becoming plant experts, I say to you, now we go into the marine world. And of course, talking to Joburg people about the marine world is a sort of slightly far away kind of operation. But you as invasive species experts have got to get better at the whole marine world, and that's a whole different story. The marine invasives are spread mostly, according to the researchers, through yacht basins, and the yacht basins around the country are where all the marine invasives are. We are actually working with the aquaculture industry down in Saldanha Bay, oysters and mussels, and we are hoping that they, like the horticultural industry was the early warning operation for plant invasives, and growers told us when there was a problem with particular species like the snake grass, Hyamali aquacetum, we actually are hoping that these people will actually warn us when really bad marine invasives are arriving. And I say to you, now is the time. You've got to learn what a white colonial sea squirt looks like. You've got to know what boring sponges and carpet sea squirts are. These are arriving on our shores, and this is where the frontiers of invasive species are currently. So this is your job now. So when you talk to people, you've got to be informative about invasive marine aquatic species, and you've got to really know what you're doing. When we go to the coastal areas, they are a bit amazed at what's happening in the inland areas as with regard to water hyacinth. It's something we've lived with for many, many decades. Back in the dark ages, many decades ago, I actually did an honest thesis on how to be a school dam water hyacinth. And here we are, you know, so many decades later, and the problem is pretty much the same as it was when I was a student. So things really haven't changed. This is a shot of rhodoplant. This is the national rowing course where everyone was supposed to be training for the Olympics, and they were supposed to be training for the World Masters Rowing Championships. This is a high conflict zone, absolutely high conflict. There are people who have bought magnificent million-dollar homes in places like Sable Hills, which overlook the Rhodoplant Dam, and they're not interested in seeing this kind of scenario. And certainly my colleagues, Debbie Muir, my colleagues, Karina Malherba, Stian Kotzer, we grapple with dealing with the stakeholder management out in these particular areas. Thank you very much to the Rhodes University Centre for Biological Control. I know Blair Cowie is here from the WITS side of the biocontrol, and I know that Rosalie Smith is also here. So if you have any queries about this area, we do have experts who are experts on this particular problem that we're dealing with. We then also are very grateful to the horticultural people who have remained with us for 25 years and continue to be here. We have Des Whitehead from Stain City. We have Carrie Goodwin from a whole bunch of nurseries in the northern suburbs, Peebles Plants, and the Colourful Group. And we are going to be putting together a nursery campaign for August. The nursery industry said to us they don't want the Plant Me Instead operation to reoccur. They would rather prefer that we go into a new operation. I've been working with Wayne Stewart at Eckhards, who came second in the Garden Centre of the Year award last week at the SAGIC convention. Congratulations, Wayne. And he's been helping us to actually look at what we're going to do. So we're going to have the campaign of what's hiding in your garden. It's going to be targeted at the youth, targeted at the next generation that can actually come through, and we're basing it on the sort of the video technology that's coming through, certainly from the sort of mascots that we're able to now look at and create. This is a Canadian campaign for youth and conservancy and look after the wildernesses and get out there and look after nature. We're going to lose the wolf. I don't think he's terribly relevant to us, but we are certainly working on mascots, and the mascots will be on a whole big eco-champ program with young, sort of funky purple and yellow. We'll be producing, we have produced and are continuing to produce a whole bunch of downloadable digital material, which will say what are the 10 worst invaders in your town, and we've got about 10 or 15 towns around the country, what's hiding in your garden, what's hiding in your pond, and then of course we're working on these mascots. The lady mascot everybody loves. The man one, the feeling is he's a bit shifty. So we might have to work on him. We don't know why he's shifty. We might have to change his mouth or we might have to change his eyes, but basically our focus group say he's shifty. So we don't want a shifty man, so we'll go with the lady, but the man will have to be reconstructed in some way and dealt with. So that's what we certainly are working on. The conflict in the sort of boundaries of the horticultural industry continue. Historically, the horticultural industry has always maintained that hybrid cultivars, even to the extent of sort of the ageratums, once they get out into nature with no water and no care, will just disappear. I think we've all agreed that we're not going to be growing single or double oleanders, and we're not terribly worried whether they are sterile or not. And certainly the canners, top experts like Leon Stratham have explained and worked out to the government that in actual fact the hybrid canners sold in garden centres today bear no resemblance to the family of Canna indica. So there certainly is a lot of chat going on. Here are the What's Hiding in Your Garden pamphlets that we will be giving out to EMIs, our green scorpions, and today we have a number of green scorpions in the room, so we're very grateful to these environmental management inspectors who are here and who avail themselves for time and place. And of course, Blair Cowie is doing a lot of work on the cactuses. We have a whole bunch of cactus experts here. Many of them reside at Wits, a lot more of them reside in Rhodes with the biocontrol, and a lot of this material will go out certainly to the sort of Eastern Cape, Eastern Province, those kind of areas. We have to train our Gauteng people that in actual fact, just because we got rid of the cactuses in the Karoo in the 1958, as you could see, the cactuses were the prickly pears all brought in by the British government who needed the cochineal for their red suits that they marched around the country and went a bit berserk about. And that era has gone. We were able to get rid of them, and there's that famous Tandisberg Mountains and Kraafrenet, but here is the torch cactus. The torch cactus currently has no biocontrol in the country that is against it, so we have to be very careful. And certainly in January we had huge problems with Gautengers going down to Cape Town. We had massive rains across the Karoo for the first time in a decade, and of course what do? On the way they see these incredible flowers that they've never seen in their lives. They think they found something wonderful and new. They cut them off and they bring them back to their Joburg gardens. And so we are, basically the torch cactus moves around, and so it does. So people like yourself have to know that in actual fact this beautiful but dangerous nonsense really cannot come back from the Karoo and come back into our particular gardens here. We also have to know that we need to communicate ourselves. We need to gather together, we need to share pictures, we need to share material for Facebook. I worked for 2 months with the National Cactus Working Group. We worked with, in October and November, we put this huge big campaign together. All farmers in the Eastern Cape would get free biocontrol if they wanted it from Rhodes University, and we would thereby get rid of these terrible cactuses that they have, and we chose a whole bunch of them. There were 4 or 5 of them, and their biocontrol things that would help them out. We put it into all these radio stations in November and December. Not one single radio station covered it. The community radio stations are holding on for dear life. The traditional media is not what it used to be. So we actually have to do this ourselves, because in actual fact it's not working. And that's what we're doing. We're putting together these pamphlets of what cactus, invasive cactus you find in particular areas. Invasive cactus has been a huge weakness. If you talk to a lot of retailers, garden centre retailers, they will tell you that when these tiny little cactuses come in these little pots, they actually couldn't tell you whether they had invasives or not, because the knowledge of what are all these cactuses and where they come from and what's alien and what's invasive is really quite difficult. So we are trying to look at that. We're also trying to look at a whole new area, and I mean, you've seen these magnificent pictures of the bongo. We've got nothing particularly against the bongo, but we would prefer that the bongo went and lived in other countries rather than South Africa. It is a Category 1A species, and we don't want it in South Africa. We're not wanting it because of the hybridization, pollution, and protecting our own species that we have in this country. But Warren Schmidt is here today. He is a reptile expert. He's an animal invasives expert, and we do have experts, and I call upon those of you who've now worked out the difference between the 5 acacia wattles to now realize that now this is your new job. You've got to work out which snakes, why, how, what, and the whole story. You've also got to start watching out for toads. You've got to become toad experts. Around the world, this is called the Asian toad. In South Africa, we're a bit politically correct. We have chosen not to smear campaign a toad with the name attached to it of Asian. So we have turned it into the black spine toad, and we'll be running an operation to put a campaign together to look out for this. This is really coming in through Durban Harbour. We do have seen a couple of sightings, and what's very difficult about this is we have a lot of indigenous toads, particularly in the Joburg area, the guttural toad, and we need to actually make sure that everyone is not just goes on an anti-toad rage and toads are removed. This is a very specific toad that will be very damaging to our environment, but one has to know the difference between toads. And so that kind of pictures, which are quite rare and quite difficult to find, we have got the researchers to give us those toads, and there is the dreaded black spine toad. That's what you're looking for. This, of course, is the indigenous leopard toad, which the Cape Townians are very precious about. It occurs in the sort of the Kenilworth area, and they have signs that say don't run over our toads, and you know, all Joburg people who are insensitive to nature, watch out. We take this very seriously. And then we have the invasive guttural toad, which is totally acceptable in Johannesburg, and in actual fact there's a campaign to get rid of it in Cape Town because it is a danger to the endemic leopard toad. So the whole issue of the toads is quite complicated, and it's at forums like this that we sort of get you on the toad road to know what you've got to know about toads. We also are going to be doing a lot about house crows. The house crows, again, the government and on your behalf has made a subjective decision that there are 1.3 million house crows in Zanzibar. There are a good couple of million in Mumbai. We've decided we would prefer not to have the whole of Joburg, the whole of Cape Town and the whole of Durban covered in these crows. And we've been consciously taking out crows in the Cape Town area. There's been a project, certainly 500,000 a year for a good decade, and we had about 10,000 crows in Cape Town about a decade ago. We've now got 200-300. So it is a conscious decision by this country to save our own biodiversity and not be overrun with these birds that are coming down the coast, mostly on ships, I would imagine. So there will be there's a national strategy on house crows has just been signed off, and I'm sure that there will be implementing agents who will look at this house crow issue over the next 3 years as to what they're going to do. So those among you who are sharpshooters, we welcome. We work with the wing sharpshooters, and we will be welcoming you into our midst. Never thought I'd say that myself, but that's what we're going to do. And then, of course, the shot-hole borer. In January, we went into Stellenbosch, and shot-hole borer in Joburg is a big deal. Anyone who's interested in invasives has heard about shot-hole borer. We have the top shot-hole borer people in the country here today. We have Adelaide, who is the chief arborist for the Joburg Parks and Grounds here today. She'll be talking Parks and City Zoos, Johannesburg City Parks and Zoo, and she'll be here talking about it. But when we were in Stellenbosch, we basically informed the Stellenbosch community in January that shot-hole borer was about 4 kilometers away from them. Subsequently, by March, the shot-hole borer was in the village of Stellenbosch, and they were all looking a bit sad. Stellenbosch is 80% exotic. They've got these incredible old oaks, and they were terribly worried about what was going on, all the conservationists there. We, of course, have been dealing with our own issues here, and I'm not going to go on about them. Adelaide will certainly let us know what's going on, but we're terribly worried about the indigenous forests, and we are grateful as a community to the top researchers, particularly Professor Wilhelm de Beer, who was at FABI and who's now basically retired, or certainly working as a consultant. We've got Professor Francois Rhodes, who's in the Stellenbosch area, and Martin Hill and his big team from Rhodes University, and we're very grateful to what they do and how they do it. In terms of the shot-hole borer, we will be rolling out a national strategy on that in the next year, but we certainly have moved away from the complete and utter hysteria to we have to live with shot-hole borer. It's here to stay. Let's not get hysterical about it. They still have it 20 years later in California, 10 years later in Israel. It's not going anywhere. Perth has just had their first operations last year of shot-hole borer infested in the Perth suburbs. So Australian Primary Industries is dealing with this as well, and we're going to actually be advising everybody in a lot of material that you go along and you check out how many holes in each tree. If it's 50 holes, it's low. 50 to 150, it's moderate. We know that in actual, for instance, Republic Road and Randburg, that they do, by the time it's heavy and severe, that's what the tree is starting to look like. But there's a lot of information in Joburg amongst people like such as yourself about how the whole shot hole works. And this is how the Californians deal with it. They basically say we need a management matrix for urban forests. At the top are low-value trees, at the bottom are high-value trees. And this is basically telling you the hazard levels, infestations, low, moderate, and what you actually do at each level of the tree. So we're going to turn this much more into a management issue rather than hysteria, and everybody will have to pull in and do what they need to do. And in the background, we certainly will work with municipalities and waste operations in municipalities to try and get the big background right. We certainly also will be looking at don't move firewood. We know that our sandparks colleagues said no firewood into the national parks. Now, that to a large extent, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. The firewood industry is quite a difficult one. It's 6 months to mature the wood, and then of course if you have a run at Christmas and you run out of firewood, then people get furious because you've told them that you can't bring firewood into the national parks, and yet you don't have the sufficient stocks when everybody gets there. There's all sorts of teething problems that have to be dealt with. But don't move firewood is a very big sort of concept worldwide. This is the Asian longhorn beetle and the emerald ash borer, and these are all the Canadian and Californian campaigns that have been running now for a good decade, and we need to repeat these in South Africa. We inform people that moving dead wood that's full of shot-hole borer is actually an environmental disaster, and this should not be done, and how we're going to do it. So I'm going to end up, this is the National Steering Committee for Shot-hole borer has okayed this leaflet, which is basically has the fair identifications. We will be putting more of this material. It will be available for download on our websites in the next few weeks, and how to manage invested trees on your property, who to actually tell if you find infested trees on public land. And that's why, you know, people like Adelaide here today are here. Thank you very much indeed. So those are the maples of Stellenbosch, which I'm not entirely sure are going to be there in 10 years. As the arborists say for Joburg, we must expect there will be not any English oaks in Johannesburg in 10 years' time. And that will be part of the evolution of the biology of where this is all going. So thank you very much. I'm very grateful. This is just setting the scene, and we now go into all our experts. So Morne, thank you. I think we're looking good.
Looking very good. Thank you very much, Kate.